Greetings, fellow racists. Who knew? Well, I want to say thanks, first of all, to the Freedom Center and to the Lincoln Club. It's very generous of you guys to have me out here. You know, I was one of the only conservative families on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which is the most left-wing neighborhood in America, except for maybe Santa Monica. And you know, we were sort of like Christians in ancient Rome. You meet someone in Central Park, and you draw a little C in the dirt, you know. You cross it out and say, I'll meet you in the catacombs under Zabar's, you know. And so it's nice to be with another sort of cell, as it were. Now, a couple things were left out of the very generous introduction. First of all, since I'm in Southern California, I'm very close to LA, I should point this out, that when the LA Times picked me up as a columnist, Barbra Streisand publicly canceled her subscription to the Los Angeles Times. And, you know, in my line of work, you know, if I were in show business, I would just walk off the public stage at that point because you're supposed to leave on a high note, and it really doesn't get much better than that. And the other thing I would just point out is that Keith Olbermann has declared me the worst person in the world 4 times. One more and I'm an ace. I think one of the problems with Olbermann is that he doesn't quite understand that I'm such a pain in his ass, because that's the fastest route to his brain. So anyway, this is one of the first speeches I have given that isn't on the 2008 election or my book in about 2 years. So, or about Canadian porn, but that's a whole different thing. So if you'll forgive me, I'm just going to work through some ideas with you guys, and we'll take it from there. Friedrich Hayek, who's one of my intellectual lodestars, no need to applause, he once said in a famous essay that it's invariably been the fate of conservatism to be dragged along a path not of its own choosing. And I think that's a generally true observation, is that, and it's certainly what Sam Tannenhouse thinks in his new and fairly idiotic book, The Death of Conservatism, where he argues that basically conservatives should be the janitorial crew behind liberals and just clean up their bigger messes, but otherwise, you know, follow liberals' leads and all the rest. But it is a tendency for conservatives to get pulled along in a direction not of their own choosing. And that quote first came to mind to me when the debate about the TARP bill was going through. And I remember John Boehner said at the time, look, it's a crap sandwich, but I'm going to eat it anyway. And I remember saying, I wrote at the time in the LA Times, I said that, you know, while Boehner's straight talk is welcome, the problem is that the meal ain't over. No matter what happens, the coprophagia, you can look it up, won't end with the bailout. The sandwich of which Boehner speaks is actually an enormous sub stretching as far as the eye can see, and conservatives will be dragged along the path of a buffet line not of their own choosing for a very long time to come. Now, here's the good news. I was right. The better news is I wasn't that right. I think America has gotten stuffed on what we're being forced down our throats a lot faster than anyone anticipated. I was at the Tea Party protests on the Mall on Saturday, and it was an amazing thing to get, I don't know how many it was. I'm skeptical of the higher numbers, but I would say at minimum 300, 1,000 people. To get that many conservatives to come out for something is really amazing. I mean, you can, those kids with the open-toed shoes and the closed minds, they'll protest anything, right? But to get people who actually have jobs to come out to the mall is really an amazing thing. And I think that was really, it was a wonderful moment. The problem, you know, though I don't want to exaggerate how great things are going. I'm talking here to a bunch of fundamentally pro-free market, pro-limited government people. And up until a couple months ago, to do that would be sort of like speaking to a bunch of Civil War reenactors, right? Or maybe a Star Trek convention. considering how out of the mainstream those sorts of views seemed ever since Obama's election. And I think one of the reasons they blew it, one of the reasons why things are looking so good, really can be traced back to the stimulus bill. I know a lot of serious Republican strategist types whose judgment on philosophy I don't value at all, but whose judgment on the actual nuts and bolts of politics I value a great deal. These guys were all terrified that what Obama was going to do was have still a $900 billion, $800 billion stimulus, whatever it was, but throw $300 billion to the conservatives. You know, give them some tax cuts, maybe some subsidies for big business, that kind of thing, and get maybe half of the Republican caucus to vote for it. And if half of the Republican caucus had voted for the stimulus, you could have seen the Republican Party being broken for a generation. Because you would have seen it impossible for Republicans to run against the stimulus and against Obamaism generally in 2010 if half the Republicans had voted for it. But instead, the administration was so greedy, so convinced of its own talking points about it being the inflection point of history and that Obama was going to bring us to the sunny uplands of history where we're all going to sing Kumbaya and buy each other a Coke, that they thought they didn't have to have the Republicans on board. And instead, what they ended up doing was unifying the Republicans. So now the Republicans are as unbought into they're even less bought into, I would argue, to the Obama administration's domestic policies than the Democrats were bought into the war on terror. Republicans have no ownership of this stuff. And since it's looking like it's not going very well, and it's looking like the American people are growing sick of it remarkably fast, I'm much more enthusiastic and optimistic about Republican and conservative chances in the near future. I mean, I've always been optimistic in the long-term future because the wonderful thing about conservatism is that we're right. And eventually, the truth will out. And this is important. This is a really important point here, if I say so myself. That Edmund Burke once said that the school of mankind is example, and it will learn it none other. And what he meant by that is you have to show people. You can't just tell people. People have to go through the paces themselves to really learn things. And to put it in a more concrete way, one of my favorite lines in politics comes from Ed Koch, who was the former mayor of New York City. And when he was voted out of office, he was asked if he was ever going to run again. And he said, no, in that very Ed Koch-y way. He said, no, the people of New York have voted me out of office, and now they must be punished. And I think that's an important lesson. That's one of the reasons, and I don't know if this will make me unpopular in here or seem prescient in here, I'm not sure. But I was against the Arnold Schwarzenegger, I was against the recall Gray Davis from the beginning. I don't think democracy is supposed to have do-overs. And I thought that what we really needed was for California, no offense, sorry guys, just to sink into the sea as quickly as possible so that the Democrats and the public sector unions would be entirely responsible for it, own it, and that would be the kind of failure that the Republicans could build a success on. Instead, Schwarzenegger has now made this mess of a state, beautiful, but a mess, sort of like Britney Spears, has made the mess bipartisan, which makes it really complicated for conservatives to have winning arguments in this debate. And I think the same thing applies in 2008. I don't know very many conservatives. In fact, I don't think I've met a one who really thinks that the Republicans deserve to win in 2008. They just didn't want, the Democrats to win. But the problem in the two-party system is that if you're going to throw one set of bums out, you have to throw the other set of bums in. And I think what the Democrats did was over-interpret their victory. They didn't realize that it wasn't so much a pro-democratic victory as it was an anti-Republican victory. And now the American people are being punished. And this gives a wonderful opportunity for Republicans to build on the failures that we're seeing roll before our eyes.